Mr. Bob Wright, Chairman of the Board of NBC Universal, and Vice Chairman of the Board and Executive Officer of the General Electric Company. Mr. Wright, along with his wife Suzanne, co-founded Autism Speaks. Mr. Wright is a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross, received his law degree from the University of Virginia School of Law. Mr. Wright, again, I thank you for your leadership in this area and for co-founding Autism Speaks. Again, your statement will be made a part of the record in its entirety, and please proceed as you desire.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for having us here. Our grandson was diagnosed in 2004 at just two years and 3 months, and we were helpless. He was potty trained, he spoke, he was very active, he was apparently a very normally developing child, and everything slipped away from him. We were helpless as we watched him slip away into this cruel embrace of a disorder. My wife Suzanne likes to call it kidnapping, as if someone had taken Christian who was meant to live, yet he was taken away and we got nothing back, and there's no way to restore him back to his family. He's a little prisoner. Since that diagnosis, we embarked on a mission to learn as much as we could about autism. Christian received the best therapies and treatments that were available, but we discovered, however, that there are scarce resources for parents dealing with autism and how thin the knowledge base is on the whole issue. We had so many questions, and instead of answers, we were confronted with a bewildering array of theories and guesses. Here's what we do know about autism. The numbers that Dr. Gerberding talked about: 1 in 150 children in the United States, 1 in 94 boys, that's the ratio. A decade ago, the experts estimated the prevalence in autism to be 1 in 2,500. This year, more children will be diagnosed with autism than with AIDS, diabetes, and cancer combined. Autism costs the society, American society, approximately $35 billion in direct and indirect expenses each year, according to a Harvard School of Public Health study. And caring for a child with autism can cost over $3 million. Autism costs the society, American society, approximately $35 billion in direct and indirect expenses each year, according to a Harvard School of Public Health study. And caring for a child with autism can cost over $3 million over a person's lifetime. Those are the estimates. Frankly, Mr. Chairman, we were shocked that a disorder this prevalent commands so little in terms of resources devoted to research and treatment when compared to other less common disorders. For example, leukemia affects 1 in 25,000 children, but receives $3+ million a year of support from the NIH. Pediatric AIDS affects 1 in 8,000 and is about $400 million a year. And autism affects 1 in 150, and the funding level is approximately $100 million. To help close this gap, we launched Autism Speaks in February of 2005 to help raise the funds that would quicken the pace of research. Together we work with literally thousands of families affected by autism to introduce and pass and have the President sign the Combating Autism Act. This is a historic act, is considered by some to be the most comprehensive piece of single disease legislation ever passed in the U.S. Congress. It authorizes $920 million over 5 years for research in autism, surveillance, awareness, early identification, and authorizes a 50% increase in the Department of Health and Human Services spending on autism. For fiscal 08, the Combating Autism Act authorizes a spending level of a total of $168,000 to the Health and Human Services Secretary for autism activities, and within that total provides for 3 distinct autism-specific items. $16.5 million to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention to conduct developmental disability surveillance and research program, which Dr. Gerberding outlined. $37 million for Health Resources and Services Administration to carry out an autism education early detection intervention program, and $114 million for NIH-funded research. Mr. Chairman, let me elaborate quickly on each of these. First for the NIH. The funding increases are incremental in total. Most important, the Act directs the NIH to spend those dollars more wisely according to a strategic research plan devised by an interagency autism coordinating committee with consumers and advocates comprising a third of its membership. The Act also directs the NIH to ramp up its investment in research and potential environmental causes of autism. With these new funds, CDC can expand its awareness and intervention activities to reach more parents, health professionals, etc. Previous investment in the CDC has produced the largest ever surveillance study, which established a baseline to measure autism prevalence trends in the United States. These studies need to continue so that we can measure the true changes in autism prevalence over time. They probably aren't enough by a long shot, but, that's the best we have right now. It is also critical that funds be appropriated to the CDC to fund the SEED study, which is the first epidemiological study to search for environmental exposures and exposure gene-immune interactions. The Combating Autism Act also creates new and innovative state-based programs in autism education, detection, and early intervention. Early intervention, as we've heard here, can lead to improvements in speech relating to learning. One of the things I would offer as a comment here that this is something we do know, that a child who does have early intervention is diagnosed before 3 years old and has been fortunate to have active therapy such as behavioral, occupational, or speech therapy, has a 50% chance of being able to matriculate to a public school. If you don't do that, you have almost no chance. And what we also know is that children in the minority community, the average age of diagnosis is 7 years old. So if you put those two together, there's almost no chance those children are going to be able to matriculate through a public school system. The two largest minorities are African Americans and Hispanics, which total almost 80 million in total. A third of our population is in a minority community. So, I mean, this whole thing, the cost involved, the issues involved early, it's critically important. Mr. Chairman, the funding increases recommended by the Combating Autism Act are relatively modest at only $25 million more than the Congressional Budget Office's baseline estimates for HHS's autism activities. But the impact this subcommittee would have by not just matching those increases, but by dictating how those funds would be spent would be historic. By doing so, Mr. Chairman, this subcommittee would take a giant step toward fulfilling the promise offered to hundreds of thousands of children and their families when Congress passed the Combating Autism Act. The public health crisis posed by autism requires an extraordinary response. With every new child diagnosed with autism, we're looking at another $3 million bill over their lifetime. It isn't business as usual. I know you understand that. I know everybody sees this. But we see a response needed that is akin to what happened with AIDS, a crisis in the 1990s, with line item appropriations for autism intervention, surveillance, and research tied to a strategic plan. This is it's late coming to recognize the prevalence. If we don't do something special, the funding won't rise at a fast enough level to deal with that. I'm fully aware that the autism community is asking this subcommittee to do something which many claim to oppose in principle, namely to appropriate by disease. In fact, Congress already took that extraordinary step when it passed the Combating Autism Act. The Act, by authorizing the creation of autism-specific line-item appropriations, recognized that autism requires this approach because of the combination of autism's high prevalence coupled with the historical neglect exemplified by the numbers you heard today on NIH and prioritize autism within its portfolio, at least at this juncture. Last year, the House and the Senate unanimously passed the Combating Autism Act, and we urge you to make the funding part of the implementation of the Act as it's written, equally bipartisan and universally a supported effort. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
For your statement, and thank you for taking your time to be here today.